All right, Kevin back with you for another episode of the $1,000,000 Relationships Podcast. And today I'm here with Paul. Paul, welcome. So awesome to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, you and I were connected, and this is the beautiful thing about relationships. You and I were connected through our mutual friend, Marusha, and I just want to give her a shout out, Marusha Murphy. Man, I love Marusha. I know you do too, Paul. And she is just brilliant at what she does. She's a world-class community builder for entrepreneurs like us. And when she reached out to me and she's like, Kevin, she goes, you know what, you really need to interview Paul on your podcast. And anytime anybody says that to me, I'm all for it. I'm like, well, you know what? If you feel that way, if you feel that strongly, I absolutely want to do that. And so here we are. And so, Paul, I have really been looking forward to this. And I know you and I got to talk a little bit before we hit the record button. But what I want to do is just kind of start by turning it over to you and setting some context here. Let everybody know a little bit about who Paul is. What do you do? Who do you serve? What inspires you to do what you do? And we'll just kind of start there, Paul.
Okay, well, this could fill the entire podcast by itself, but I'll try not to make that happen. And yeah, definitely a shout out to Marusha as well. Very solid Irish surname she has. But I don't do many podcasts. I've just had to step away from it. It took up so much of my calendar. But likewise, when Marusha made the intro, it was like a done deal. It had to be done. So thank you again to her.
Yeah.
But my story dates back to 2009. I kind of see myself as the poster child for traditional education. So both my parents are teachers. So you can only imagine what that was like. You're running home from school and you realize, why am I running? I'm actually getting home to school part 2. So, everything was about exams. Everything was about results. Santa Claus even had a strange obsession with my report card. So, my entire life has been built towards, go to college, get a degree. So I did all of that. I got a degree in industrial biochemistry. Then I got qualified as a chemical engineer. Then I got qualified as a project management professional. I worked in the corporate world in a medical device company, Boston Scientific, for 9 years. And I was actually their youngest ever director, just at age 30 at the time. And they just paid for my MBA, Master's in Business Administration.
Wow.
And I remember waking up one morning thinking, what's going on here? Because I'm literally adorned with letters from every angle, but I am completely broke in that I call it rich poor, where you look rich from the outside, but if anybody can see your bank account, they'll realize, hang on, you don't own any of this. Mm-hmm. So I was in negative equity of up to $500,000. I didn't own my car. I didn't own my houses. And when I said this to any of my friends, family, people who dare to listen, they just said, what's wrong with you? You're living the dream. This is it. Like, you've mastered life. And I just remember thinking, wow, I mean, mortgage truly does come from the Latin word mortir, meaning death, yeah. Right? So debt until death. You can see why mortgage brokers aren't too displeased that we don't speak Latin too often anymore. Would you like debt until death? No, thank you. But, I'd literally worked myself into a situation where I needed to work for 2 lifetimes to get out of these mistakes that I had made. And I had done literally to a T everything you were supposed to do through the traditional system to make it to the peak of what life can bring to you in the 2000s. Mm-hmm. And I was 30 years of age and $500,000 in debt, like I said. And I remember I went to a conference. I can't even remember how I came across it, some email, but it was in Ireland, it was in Dublin. Irish people are the most skeptical people in the world. So you can only imagine how this went down, like an online marketing conference with all American speakers trying to get each other to high five each other and tell each other we're awesome. This is stuff we do not do in Ireland. Try to give your neighbor a massage on the shoulders. We're like, we don't even hug our own family. What are you trying to do here? And this was sort of people were literally walking out until one speaker got up on stage and he said, there's a major irony going on here. And he said, it's that you guys think we're here to brainwash you. And he said, the irony is that you guys are so brainwashed, you don't actually see the wood from the trees. Even when we're here pointing the truth out to you, most of you between age 20 and 60 here are in debt. And you don't seem to see that as a challenge. None of the speakers on stage are. But he said, here's what you've been bought into. He said, you've been brainwashed to believe that wealth is connected to the letters you have after your name. And he said, just in case you don't understand, you believe that wealth is connected to how far and how deep you go into the educational system, traditional educational system. He said, I found as a high school dropout that a much more accurate measure of wealth, rather than letters after a name, are numbers in my bank account. And the moment he said it, it was like being hit with a sledgehammer, where somebody had finally verbalized what I had been thinking for a few years. But, you know, I was going weekend to weekend, drink at the weekend, back to work. This is just a routine. This is what you do, buy your house, buy your rental accommodation, until suddenly it wasn't the right decision to make. So I was full of anger, full of venom. It wasn't my fault. It was the bank's fault. It was everybody else's fault. But I actually ended up very quickly that weekend realizing I need to do something here, because I know exactly how my life is going to continue on in the corporate ladder. I could see what my boss's job was. I could see what my boss's role was. So it was fairly well defined. It was going to be moving to the US next, to Minneapolis is my next step. But I remember thinking, well, what's the worst that could happen if I start learning some of this online related stuff? Now, I was just as skeptical as everybody else. I mean, I just believed the internet was a scam, full stop, right? And find people around you to believe you, right? And it's easy to find people that will be skeptical. But I invested in 3 programs, and just to shorten it down, because I think this is so important to people, because very few people hear people who have the story that almost exactly resonates with their own life. You know, they've done the right things. They've gone to college. You know, they haven't got a massive rags to riches story like most speakers, which I thought was, kind of odd in its own right. You know, it almost turned me off the industry as a whole. It's like, well, has any normal person ever made money on the internet, was kind of what I was asking myself. And so what I ended up doing was I paid for 3 workshops, went to the first couple, but I started to hear about Tony Robbins. And he had an event in Secaucus in New Jersey in March 2009. And I asked my boss, would he pay for me to go on a leadership training course? He said, yeah, sure. He was a great boss. So he didn't know it was Tony Robbins. He didn't know who he was as much as I didn't know who he was. I didn't even check who he was on YouTube. I just was seeing, could I get a trip to New York out of this? And I certainly didn't know the raucous, say I type of thing that was about to happen. But, it was St. Patrick's weekend. It was New York City. I was like, I've got nothing to lose. I went there, 3,000 highly pumped people. Tony came out on stage. I'll never forget. He said something like, everybody, I want you to jump around like complete lunatics. And I literally looked for the closest exit to say, okay, this isn't for me. And he quickly said, oh, by the way, those of you not dancing, you're walking on fire tonight. If you don't do everything I say, you're going to burn. And there was about 9 of us in the corner, 3 Irish and 5 Germans, all thinking, what is the hell is this? And I just started jumping around. I got into it. Roll on 9 hours. I texted my boss to say, your services will no longer be required. And I'm not exaggerating. That is what happened. Wow. And I do not in any shape or form endorse it. It was complete and utter madness. It was going from one extreme of skepticism to one extreme of, all in, cut all your, burn your boats, etc., etc. And quite literally 1 month from then, I left my job. Remember my boss saying, Paul, this is the 2nd worst recession since the famine. Like, what are you going to do? I said, oh, don't you worry about that. And he goes, no, really, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go live with passion. He's like, oh, okay, cult. So what are you passionate about, Paul? I was like, oh, I've absolutely no idea. So what I did, this is my big plan. I then learned about trading the stock markets. And because it was a shiny object, and I proceeded in the next month to lose 9 years worth of savings on the stock market. Wow. And that was when I literally had to eat humble pie and appreciate, I need to do this internet stuff because it costs nothing except time. I've got all the time in the world. And you know what? I do not want to go crawling back into work, with my ego saying, okay, you know what? The faraway hills aren't any greener. And within 4 months of starting, I'd made $10,000 a month from Twitter. I focused on Twitter to begin with, which is not a long story, but it's relevant now with Elon and stuff. And within that doubled the next month, that doubled the next month, that doubled the next month. And soon I was making more in a month than it was in a year. Wow. From a corporate role for almost a decade. And even then I was still considering, will I go back? Is this going to end? Those gremlins take a long, long time to go away. And I can tell you, my dad was so happy when I finally wrote my first bestseller maybe 4 years ago, because he could finally tell the neighbors and family members what I actually did. He didn't know how to describe what I did for about a solid 10 years. So what I have been doing is basically helping on two levels. The Rethink Academy is basically designed to help people like myself who have been doing everything the way you were supposed to do it your whole life, and you wake up one morning and you realize, is this it? Is this all life has to offer? But you're not willing to give up. You're not willing to just say, yeah, this is it. Let's just coast on and let's not complain because everybody else is in the same situation. It's for those people that want to rethink that, whether it's in their finances, whether it's in their business, entrepreneurship, whether it's their job, whether it's their health. It's the likelihood is you've just done the wrong things, because most of what we've learned, as we find out inevitably, is designed to get us different results as opposed to the outcomes that we're looking for in life. And so that's called the Rethink Academy. And then the other company I have and foundation is to help children and teenagers at a younger age master finances and master entrepreneurship through animation and through the metaverse, so that we can reconnect families around technology rather than technology kind of splitting and creating chasms within families where parents think technology is bad and kids think their parents are, from the Stone Age. And it's meeting in the middle that they can have fun and learn through gamification.
Yeah. Wow. What an amazing story. I'm sure a lot of, because our audience is entrepreneurs, founders, and CEOs. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this going, Paul, man, you're speaking my language, man. I can totally relate to so much of what you shared. And so I really appreciate you sharing all that, Paul. So let's shift gears just a little bit here. And I'm going to reiterate this question for the benefit of all the listeners. So have you ever met or been introduced to a person or persons who completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person? And Paul, I'm just really excited to hear your story, your experience around this topic, and give you the opportunity to honor somebody who's had such a profound impact on your life and on your business.
Sure. I actually, I almost have like a sequence of people in terms of milestones. So, because if you take any of them out of the picture, it would kind of lose, it would have all fallen down. So the first person would be a gentleman called Pat Slattery, who's actually from my hometown in Ireland, who put that event together in Dublin, where I came across all of these strange American speakers. So without him, none of this would have happened. And that's what led me to Tony Robbins, without which I doubt I would have ever grown a pair enough to actually cut that cord to just go there and just get out there and do that. And there's a right time for somebody like that in people's lives, and that was definitely the right time for me. And I've gone on to met Tony numerous occasions, and I've spoken on the same stage with him on numerous occasions, which is pretty amazing. A big buzz the first time that happened. Yeah. Then my first mentor, actually, Mark Anastasi, him and my first business partner, Millie Ponce, they were very important to me in my formative years. The first 4 or 5 years, my first few $1 million were made with them. And then I really started to follow the guidance of John DeMartini from The Secret. He was kind of my next level of learning, and he totally expanded my perspective from short-term money making to vision, values, thinking legacy, thinking beyond yourself, thinking literally beyond the planet, where you suddenly have a kind of call of duty within you to do what you're doing for a very different reason as to what it might have looked like in the beginning, and not to have any guilt with that, you know, that you change and grow over a period of time. And then I have to say, John Assaraf had a huge impact, because John Assaraf was also one of those guys in The Secret, but we actually became really close in terms of friends. And that really kind of reassured me that, you know what, you're on the right path here. And you know, nobody is any better or worse than you are. You know, we're all here on our own mission, our own path, and our own journey. And he always reminded me of that. And he also reminded me my initials, POM. I said, just always remember peace of mind. Always ask yourself. Yeah, I thought that was really clever, because he knows I like acronyms, but he said, you know, always ask yourself the question, Paul, will that buy you peace of mind? And if so, you know, why not? Yeah. And certainly after all of this kicked off, from my family perspective, I met my wife 3 years after I started being an entrepreneur. And 6 years ago, we had our first child, who quite simply has completely changed the game for me, because, you know, just when you think everything is as it should be, and, you know, you've got your plans, she's born with multiple challenges, special needs in multiple different ways, from top of the spectrum with autism, and she's still nonverbal. Like, it's ironic, with her dad as an international speaker, and she can't speak, and that brings up, you know, an incredible amount of challenges with every day that passes. And it just raises my bar in terms of, okay, now we've created a foundation to help parents in a similar situation. Like, I think the divorce rate among parents with children with autism is over 85%. You know, it really brings you back down to a place of, well, there's a reason you've been given this opportunity and this wealth, because you can, you know, you really can. And that's what drove on the children's financial education, the entrepreneurship, but that came first. And then it was like, okay, even at a more basic level here, there's children who can't even speak. You know, what do you do to allow them to be heard? Yeah. So yeah, without trying to get too, you know, expansive about the whole thing, there has been that chain, that's kind of the thread, should I say, from start to where I am now, and it's very much guiding me as in terms of, you know, what's next and what keeps me inspired. You have to move on from the money at some point. Yeah.
You know, I've never brought this up on one after doing, well, I think this is the 120th interview I've done for this podcast. But what you just shared about your daughter, man, that hit home, because maybe you and I can talk more about it offline, but we adopted a daughter. What has it been now? She's 11 now, so we adopted her when she was 3, and she's a special needs child. And in fact, when we adopted her, she did not walk. And about a year and a half later, on Christmas Eve, she just stood up and just started walking. And I was like, wow, that experience right there was such a big deal, because, you know, we adopted her knowing that she didn't walk, and that this is just something that we're probably going to have to deal with, you know, and to, you know, have her at least start walking is like, wow, well, you know what, this might get a little bit easier than we thought it was going to be, you know, but like you said, there's, you know, and like, I can relate to so much that you shared, and man, it just hit home. And so thank you for that personally. I'm just curious, you mentioned a number of people here, you know, Tony, Mark, Pat, John, well, 2 Johns, John DeMartini and John Assaraf. And you know, when I just want you to kind of like, just think about one of these relationships for this particular question that I'm going to ask you. But when you think of one of these relationships, and over the years, what has happened, and where you just know that because of your relationship with that person, that you have been allowed to make a really big impact in this world that, you know, hands down would have never happened had you not met that person. And I'm sure you could do that with every one of these people that you've mentioned, Paul. But just for, you know, because like I said, my goal is I want anybody listening to this to just be inspired, to place an intentional focus on, you know what? These guys are so right. Relationships are so valuable. I just want to inspire them to create more meaningful, real, valuable, and profitable relationships. So I'd love to hear your answer to that question.
Yeah. By the way, you just gave me goosebumps with the story of your child there. That's amazing. I'm sure people are at home feeling the exact same. When you frame it that way, it's actually pretty easy for me. It's Mark Anastasi, okay. Because he was my first mentor. It was at his event where I made my first money online. He challenged me in ways I'd never been challenged. Firstly, because he was younger than me, I had an ego, which, you know, I didn't like knowing that. Especially with all my qualifications and having my director cap on, yeah. You know, he very, very quickly took me down to size and says, like, you literally know nothing about this world, you know, and the sooner you realize that you are the problem and that you're not coachable, the faster we can kind of move on to the next steps. I also tried to get his mentoring for free, and he batted that back. You know, he knew how to handle all the objections. He really, you know, he cut me down to size in a way that I needed it. But that said, you know, he literally said, do you want to make the first money I made online was $44.20. And I remember he just said, do you want to make $44.20 every now and again, or do you want to make real life-changing money? And I said, isn't that obvious? Like real life-changing money? And he said, no, it's not obvious to me. He said, yesterday you spent most of our conversation bad-mouthing the two other coaches that you'd been to their workshop because they offered you something else that you didn't want to buy. And he said, were they accurate in their assumption that you weren't going to do anything without that? I said, yeah, but. And he goes, you need to realize you're just throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. He said, you don't like sales. You don't like being told when you're wrong. You don't like being, you know, having to be second fiddle, all these things that I just needed to hear. But that said, he then not only showed me how to take making $44 online with Twitter into how to turn it into 10,000. He also partnered me up with my first business partner. He put us on stage together. He actually brought us onto stages. He helped us host our first event. He literally opened doors. I'll never forget being at dinner one night with other speakers. And it was just magical what he did. He said, I was completely intimidated. I mean, it was the who's who of, you'd know them if I mentioned them, of top global internet marketing speakers, and me and my business partner. And I remember he just said, don't worry, by the end of this, each and every one of them are going to know your name. And I said, what do you mean? He said, just, you know what my rules are. You do exactly what I say and you don't question it. So towards the end of the dinner, he said, right, you're going to go to the bathroom now, but you're going to stop on the way and you're going to ask for the bill and you're going to pay for it. And you're going to tip 20% and you're going to come back and you're going to just smile and say nothing. And I just said, that's not happening. Firstly, I don't have the money. Secondly, I don't know if there's a limit that high on my credit card. And anyway, he knew that I could figure it. So I went up and I did exactly that. And there was this big thing with the speaker saying, oh, let's put the cards in the middle and pretend, and whatever one we pull out, you pay for it, this kind of thing. And Mark said, no, don't worry. I've taken care of it. And I said, what? Is that what he's going to do? He's taking credit for this? And they said, Mark, there's no way you did. He said, correct, I didn't. But this guy did. He paid for your dinner. He offered. And I said, sure, why not? He said, I'd like to introduce you to Paul Omahony. He's a Twitter expert. Each and every speaker, bar one, came up to me, gave me their personal phone number and said, if you ever need anything, if you're ever going to launch a product, or you're ever going to do anything, just personally text me. You know, you don't need to come through the email. And just I'll never forget. He said, now, how much would that cost you for one-to-ones with each of these people to get those phone numbers for what you just paid for the dinner? And that was just an example of just the sheer wisdom that this guy had and was able to kind of just relay to me in such a powerful way. So within a year of starting, I made my first $1 million with my business partner, Millie, because of Mark. Then we got to a point where even he said, right, you've kind of outgrown this. You need to go find another mentor. And I went to his wedding and all of that kind of stuff. But actually, interestingly, just a month ago, we met up in Cyprus where he introduced me at an event. He hasn't spoke. He completely gave up in this industry years ago and got into something else. But he introduced me, and it was such a really interesting cycle of, you know, he was like, okay, well, this guy I met back in blah, 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 and he was all did a bit of this and that. But he's proof that if you just put your ego behind it, just start being coachable and realize that, you know, you've taken a lifetime to get where you are today, earnings wise, you know, let's just shorten that time frame down dramatically, just press the buttons in the right order. Yeah. You know, that anything is possible. And it was quite very humble, always willing to listen. A few years ago, I actually even hired him as a fractional CEO of one of my companies, which you can just imagine the buzz you get from that. When, you know, a former mentor is actually happy to be hired by you. So it's just, I learned so much from him, from humility, wisdom, cycles of up and down that are going to happen as an entrepreneur. You know, he's playing at a very different level now in terms of getting massive investment into companies, hundreds of millions of stuff, which I'm nowhere near. But at the same time, he's somebody I could literally reach out to at any moment in time, whether it's work-related, family-related, just personally checking in. Yeah, I learned an awful lot from him over the years, I have to say. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing that, because, you know, like I said, my goal is I just want to inspire other entrepreneurs listening to this to place an intentional focus on creating more real, meaningful, valuable, and profitable relationships in life. Because as entrepreneurs, as founders, as CEOs, relationships are the most valuable asset that we have. And you have just driven that point home so well, Paul. And so, you know,
I'd actually just add to that, Kevin. Yeah, because I'd say the reason why Marusha said we should chat is because I would say we've generated maybe 55 million over the last few years, but I would say 80 to 90% of that revenue is generated directly from partnerships.
Yes.
And we work with about 180 separate partners, and that's how we run business. Because you know, with all the various ad platforms, etc., there's always the ups and downs. There's the inconsistencies, but there's nothing inconsistent about relationships, because right. You can always go back to somebody and help each other out. And that's what I've found over the years has been just so incredibly important. And anyone you're introduced to, always have without having an expectation of anything from them, just maybe one thing, expect that there's something you're meant to learn from that person, and some reason you're meant to meet that person, no matter whether they're sweeping the street in front of you or whether they're speaking on stage in front of you. It makes no difference. There's a part of you that's about to be unearthed or shown to you there, I'm pretty sure.
That's right. That's right. Well, Paul, for anybody listening to this going, dang, Kev, I really like Paul. I like the way he shows up. I like who he is. I like what he stands for. How can they find out more information on what you're doing and all that? What are some resources that you have?
So one of the easiest ways is to, you can download my Rethink Social Media book at just rethinkgift.com.
Okay.
If you like time management and planning and organization, on Audible, you can find it's probably my best-selling book now, Rethink Time Management.
Okay.
Or just follow me on the socials, PaulMahony. That's it on Twitter. It's the same on Instagram with an underscore at the end of it. Or on Facebook, it's Paul Omahony Speaker, all one word.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Very good. Well, Paul, any last words you'd like to share before we call it a wrap?
I will actually, especially on the theme of relationships. It's very easy as an entrepreneur to, to try and find the next best ad strategy, whether it's TikTok now or YouTube or whatever it is, right? But if you actually sat down and used, what Keith Cunningham refers to as think time, or as I paraphrase, rethink time, and just once a week, sit down, even for 10 minutes, and ask yourself the question, who do I know that has the perfect audience for what I have, and it doesn't in any way compete with what they do?
Yeah.
And just continue to ask yourself that question, and you will be, I would say, mesmerized by the amount of people that, even if they don't show up in that short period of time, they will appear in that week following that. You'll suddenly start to realize, oh, wow, there's somebody I could reach out to, because relationship conquers everything else. Grant Cardone is talking about it now, all these 10x events with, I sent my CEO to it. He said, if you want to 10x your business, you do it through collaborations and relationships, not through ad spend or anything else. And he's 100% correct. And of course, you've been onto it for years, Kevin. So, but it's just taking that, from just, oh yeah, that sounds great, to actually something you should be doing. Who do you know that has that access, or who do you know somebody who has that access, and then just see how can you help them out.
That's right. That's right. Wow. Such valuable insight and advice there. So, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. I really appreciate it. I know we are going to impact a lot of lives as a result of this. So thanks again, Paul.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.